Trojan War World History. This is a topic part of the ancient history and ancient Greek history. Coming to the background to Trojan War. So the Trojan War was a war between the Greeks and the Trojans, and this is one of the most famous of all Greek legends. Today we most associate the story of the Trojan War with the poems of Homer and Iliad. The poem of Homer was Iliad and Odyssey, but the Iliad and Odyssey say little about the majority of the Trojan saga. The Iliad's theme is the rage of Achilles. Achilles was one of the greatest and the famous warriors who fought in the Trojan War, and Iliad deals only with the final weeks of the war. Odyssey's theme is the voyage of Odysseus. Odysseus was one of the famous generals who fought in the Trojan War, and he fought from the Greek side. Much of the other legends surrounding the Trojan War come from other sources, and you may not have heard the word Trojan War, but you may have watched the movie Troy, and the war or the theme of the movie Troy is the same as the historic topic of Trojan War. So what is the mythological background of the Trojan War? The gods and the goddesses are all gathered for the wedding of Pallas and Thetis. Thetis was a mother of Achilles, the goddess of discord, Aether. Bitter that she alone was not invited, wished to stir up trouble and threw an apple into the ceremony with the label to the fairest. Zeus or Jupiter, not wanting to anger any goddess, very wisely refused to make the decision about who will be awarded the apple. So the start of the war was by the goddess of discord, who somehow mythologically started the war by throwing an apple in a party which she was not invited, or a meeting, wedding of the palace. That was the event which she was not invited, and she threw an apple labeling to the fairest, and Zeus will now have to decide how to avoid the situation of trouble and whom to give this apple. And Zeus assigned Paris, a Trojan prince, to make the decision about which goddess will receive the apple. Each goddess will then bribe Paris. Hera or Juno, the queen of the gods, offer Paris power. Athena, goddess of wisdom, offer Paris wisdom and respect. Venus, goddess of love, offer Paris the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose the most beautiful woman in the world. It was agreed that the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen of Sparta. At one time, even Greek prince decided to marry. Every Greek prince decided to marry Helen. Her father, King Tyndareus, was afraid to pick one to be her husband, because he was afraid a war would occur. He thus made them take an oath that they would all protect the husband of Helen. He finally chose Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, to be the husband of Helen. He also made Menelaus the king of Sparta. So after all this mythological background and happenings, Paris was once invited to home of Menelaus as a guest, and he was there for some days, and during that time he fell in love with Paris. And when Menelaus went off to Crete, Paris left with Helen. All the major warriors of Greece were thus obliged to go to war, because Helen was a pride of Greek, and a Trojan prince had left with her or had abducted her, and now they had to get back Helen, and it was their obligation to go for a war, and a war was sure to be happening unless this would not go with the proud history that the Greeks carried. Some tried to avoid it. Odysseus tried to pretend he had gone mad, and he began sowing his fields with salt. Achilles His mother Thetis tried to keep him from going by disguising him as a girl, but Odyssey exposes this trick. Finally, the outcome is that all of them will have to go to war against Troy. The main characters of the war are Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, commander of in-chief; Menelaus, king of Sparta and husband of Helen; Achilles is the greatest warrior; Patroclus, Achilles' friend and cousin; Odysseus, king of Ithaca, most cunning, shrewd and brave. The king of Paphos, Cinyras, wrestled his way out of his promise of 50 ships. He sent one real one, then 49 toy ships. So all these were somehow to bribe other kings to join the war. The leader of the expedition was King Agamemnon of Mycenae, at the time the most powerful city-state of Greece. Agamemnon had offered Artemis or Diana, who withheld favorable winds, so she was a god, in order to gain favorable winds. So Agamemnon had to sacrifice his own daughter Iphigenia. The war of Greek lasted for 10 years. The war of Trojan lasted for 10 years. And in the Iliad, Homer tells the story of the last weeks of the war. During the war, Achilles had refused to fight because Agamemnon had stolen one of his prizes of the war, the girl Briseis. Achilles only returned to fight after his dear friend Proclus was slain by the great Trojan warrior Hector. And after this, there is a direct hand-to-hand combat between Hector and Achilles kills Hector, and that was one of the main turning points of the Trojan War. Even after many days of war, the Greeks were not able to invade or get into the walls and gate of Troy. And finally they made a plan. They seem to have left Troy and vacated the beach where they had made their war camp, and they, as a souvenir, they kept a tall horse which is called the Torsion Horse. This horse is also symbol of the god Apollo, and the people of Troy, they could not refuse this offering to god Apollo, and they brought the horse into the walled city. And during the night time, when they were celebrating for the victory and were drunk and asleep, the Greeks, they emerged out of this large horse and they opened the gates for the other soldiers, and also they burned the city of Troy, and thus the war ended. And that was one of the main or the final scenes of the Trojan War. Achilles. When Achilles was born, his mother Thetis tried to make him immortal by dropping him in the river Styx. As she immersed him, she held him by one heel and forgot to dip him a second time so he could get wet too. Unfortunately, the place where she held him remained untouched by the magic water of Styx, and that part stayed mortal. So Achilles died when an arrow by Pyrrhus hit him on his heels, and it was said to be caused by Apollo, or was one of the curse by Apollo. So that's how Achilles died. But somehow the Greeks had managed to burn down Troy and win the war. This is a map of ancient Troy.